They called him savage long before they knew his name, long before anyone cared to learn it, because it was easier to spit a word than face a man's pain. And on that dust-choked afternoon when the crowd gathered near the auction pens, the sun burned low and merciless, turning the air thick with cruelty, he stood bound at the wrists, bruised, bloodied, yet unbowed, his dark eyes steady even as men laughed and boys threw stones, and when one struck his cheek, he did not flinch, because flinching had once cost him more than blood. The trader raised his whip and shouted that the beast was worth less than a mule, that he was violent, untrainable, fit only for chains, and the crowd roared its approval, until a woman's voice cut through the noise like a blade through rope, "Don't hurt him." And silence followed, stunned and sharp, as every head turned toward her, a woman in a dust-stained dress with determination blazing in her eyes, stepping forward without fear, her hands shaking not with weakness but resolve, and when the trader sneered and asked her if she'd lost her senses, she replied simply, "I'll buy him," causing laughter to ripple again, louder this time, crueler, but she didn't retreat, didn't blink, only added, "Call him savage all you want. I see a man worth saving," and something shifted then, not in the crowd but in him, because no one had spoken of him as a man in longer than he could remember. The trader named a price meant to humiliate her, meant to drive her away, yet she reached into her satchel and counted every coin she had, placing them into his dirty palm without hesitation, and as the chain was unlocked and the rope cut, the trader leaned close and warned her that she'd bought herself a monster, but she met his eyes and said, "No, you sold me a soul," and led the men away as whispers followed like ghosts. The journey to her ranch was long and tense, miles of open land where the men expected betrayal at every step, where kindness felt like a trap, yet she spoke to him gently, not prying, not commanding, offering water, food, space, and when he finally asked why she did it, why she paid for someone everyone feared, she said her father once told her that cruelty spreads when good people look away, and she refused to look away again. Nights passed, wounds healed slowly, silence broke in fragments, and piece by piece his story emerged, taken young, beaten into obedience, punished for defending others, branded savage for refusing to become what they wanted, and she listened without judgment, without pity, because pity still places you above someone, and she stood beside him instead. Trouble came as it always does when hatred realizes it has lost control, men from town riding out with accusations, threats, and guns, claiming she harbored danger, demanding she hand him over, but she stepped onto her porch and told them that no man would be dragged from her land in chains again, not while she breathed, and when they tried to force their way, he stood beside her, not with violence, but with presence, a living contradiction to every lie they believed, and in that moment the town saw something they did not expect, a so-called savage choosing restraint, dignity, humanity, and doubt cracked the foundations of their cruelty. The standoff ended without blood, but the real battle had already been won inside him, because being seen, truly seen, had awakened something stronger than rage, something harder to break, and as seasons changed, he became not her burden but her partner, working the land, protecting it, laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in years, and when people finally stopped calling him savage and started calling him by his name, it felt like justice written quietly. Without applause, the story spread, not as legend but as reminder, that one voice can interrupt a mob, that one act of courage can rewrite a life, and as the sun set over the ranch one evening, she looked at him and said, "You were never what they called you," and he answered, "Neither were you," because they had both been underestimated, and together they proved that saving one life can sometimes save two. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that humanity still matters even in the harshest worlds, then don't forget to by the time the rumors reached the town again, they had twisted themselves into something ugly and dangerous, because fear never travels alone, it brings lies with it, and people said the woman had been bewitched, that the so-called savage now ruled her ranch like a shadow king, that livestock went missing and blood marked the soil, none of which was true, yet truth rarely outruns hatred. And one night as the wind howled across the plains and the moon hung pale and sharp, riders appeared at the edge of the property, torches flickering like angry eyes, and the man felt the old instincts claw up his spine, the urge to run, to hide, to strike first before the pain came, but he stopped himself, because he remembered her voice, steady and human, telling him he was not an animal, and instead of reaching for a weapon he stepped into the lamplight beside her, letting the world see him fully, scars and all. The leader of the riders spat at the dirt and accused him of crimes without names, of violence without proof, demanding he be handed over before someone gets hurt, and for a moment the night held its breath, because this was how it always began, with words pretending to be justice, but the woman did not move aside, did not bargain, did not tremble. She simply said that no man would be taken from her land based on fear and gossip, that if they wanted him, they would have to face the truth first, and that truth stood right there, unarmed, choosing restraint when violence would have been easier. Anger flared, guns lifted, and in that instant the man spoke, his voice low, rough, and used to being heard, yet strong, telling them he would go if it meant no blood was spilled, telling them he was tired of running, tired of being hunted for surviving, and her head snapped toward him, eyes blazing, because sacrifice without justice was just another form of cruelty, and she refused to let him pay that price again. The tension broke not with gunfire but with doubt, because one of the riders, younger than the rest, lowered his weapon, saying quietly that monsters didn't speak like that, didn't stand still when threatened, and cracks spread through the group as murmurs followed. Uncertainty weakening the mob until one by one the torches dipped, the riders retreating with warnings instead of bullets, leaving behind a silence heavy with what might have been. Afterward, when the danger passed, the man's knees finally buckled, the weight of years pressing down all at once, and she caught him before he fell, not as a savior, not as an owner, but as someone who refused to let him collapse alone, and for the first time he allowed himself to believe that safety could be more than temporary. Days later he rode into town with her, not hidden, not chained, but upright, meeting eyes instead of avoiding them, and though some glared, others looked away in shame, because seeing a person ruins a good prejudice, and when a shopkeeper addressed him respectfully, calling him "sir," it struck harder than any whip ever had. Still, the past does not release its grip easily, and nights brought memories that woke him gasping, hands shaking, until she taught him something simple, yet revolutionary, that healing did not require forgetting, only refusing to let the past decide the future, and slowly he began to work not just with his hands but with his heart, fixing fences, calming frightened horses, stepping between conflict and violence whenever he could, becoming proof that the name Savage had never belonged to him. When the town finally gathered again, this time not to auction or punish but to decide whether fear would continue to rule them, it was his testimony that silenced the square, not polished or rehearsed, just honest, a man saying he had been broken and was still standing, saying he would not repay cruelty with cruelty, because someone once chose to see him as worth saving, and that choice changed everything. And in that moment the woman realized she had not rescued him alone, because he had rescued something in all of them too, a memory of decency they thought was gone. If this chapter kept your heart racing and your faith in humanity flickering instead of fading, then stay with this journey, and the change did not come loudly, it came quietly, the way real justice often does, through small moments that slowly rewrote what people believed. And the man once called Savage felt it the day a child approached him without fear, offering a shy smile instead of a stone, and in that instant he understood that redemption is not earned through punishment but through patience. The town no longer watched him as a threat but as a test of their own conscience, and while some still whispered, their voices no longer carried power, because fear weakens when confronted by truth lived openly, and the woman who had stood before a mob for him now stood beside him as an equal, her courage reflected in his calm strength. Both of them changed, both of them stronger for having refused to surrender to cruelty. When the land prospered and peace settled like a long-awaited dawn, he finally spoke his name aloud without shame, claiming it as proof that he had survived, not as what others made him, but as who he chose to be. And the world, for once, listened. Their story did not end with applause or legend, but with something far rarer, a future built on dignity, choice, and the simple power of seeing another human being. And if this ending moved you, if it reminded you that one act of compassion can rewrite a destiny, then subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this, stories that restore faith, challenge cruelty, and celebrate courage, are waiting to be told.